Thank you for that. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and go to the book of John. We're going to be trying to cover all of the book of John tonight, all right? So trying. I'm foregoing the video tonight. I'm skipping it because they broke the book of John into two sections, and I'm going to try to cover it all in one section tonight. So I didn't want to do 16 minutes of video and then not have any time to talk about this. But I need you all to be awake, okay? And I need you all to be paying attention because if you notice on the back of the prayer list on the handout, almost every single thing is a question, okay? So this is designed it's in an order. I mean, it kind of talks about the main points. I've got an outline of the book of John and proving the point from start to finish. But it's also designed for whatever we don't cover tonight, because we're not going to be able to cover every single thing on here, for you to be able to take this home and to be able to look up those passages and to answer some of those questions and to see how it all flows and works together, okay? So, but if you have that out, almost everything on the back of there is a question. So I've got a lot of them that we're going to go through, and I'm excited about doing that tonight. I was thinking, it's 7:30. I don't normally start that early. I try to only go like 20, 25 minutes on Wednesday night. So I was like, maybe I'll tell everybody that we might get done early, but then I was like, no, we probably won't get done early. We'll just use all of the time. So don't have any false pretenses about that, all right? So we're going to be in the book of John. Before I start, let me just ask you the question, what do you know about the book of John? Maybe something that you have highlighted in there? You give me some feedback. We'll start with what you all know before we jump into this. Get you thinking right. Okay, go ahead, Gary, and then Brother Ray. Okay, it is a lot about salvation. You already stole one of my points. I have to just say it right there. Does anybody want to take a guess at how many times the word believe is used in the book of John? I was shocked when I saw this. Go ahead, just guess. 74, less than, more than. Charity said 200, you said 74, somewhere in the middle of that. 131, I like that. No, about somewhere around 100 to 110, okay? Uses of the word believe. All right, so, excellent. You got it right. It talks a lot about salvation in there. All right, go ahead, Brother Ray. Okay, he does portray Jesus as the Son of God. Matthew portrayed him, we're wrapping up the Gospels tonight. Matthew portrayed him as the what? King of the Jews? King. Yep, king. Mark portrayed him as servant. Luke portrayed him as the Son of Man. And John portrays him as the Son of God. I was telling Jimmy up here tonight before church started, I don't know. I have felt a little bit guilty in some ways when I study this out, the way that we have doing these overviews, because I've read the Gospels so many times. I've read through the Bible multiple times. But sometimes we chop it up. Sometimes we'll just read like a chapter or two at a time, and we kind of leave it just jointed in our mind. But what's been really helpful and what's been exciting to me as I've dove into these things and studied them out is just seeing that from start to finish, each one of the authors, and ultimately the Holy Spirit through God, is telling a story. I mean, he's proving a point. And it's been neat to see even in the Gospels how the way, even when they're in front of Pilate at the end, for instance, they all it's all the same confrontation with the religious leaders and Pilate. It's all the same story that you could say verbatim. You know it. But when you see it from the big picture, Mark, for instance, when he's down there, you know what they're talking about. When he's before Pilate and he's before the chief priest, they're talking about the fact that he said he would tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. The suffering servant, he was the temple, but he was rebuilding, like he came to seek and to save that which was lost, and he was going to do it by becoming a servant of man. You go to the book of Luke, okay, the Son of Man, and at the end of the book of Luke, the phrase that's used there is, the Son of Man shall sit on the right hand of the power of God. That's what he says. That's his answer back. And so he's saying, the Son of Man, you think I'm just a man? Someday you're going to see me sitting on the right hand of the power of God. Yes, I am the ideal man. I am the Savior of the world, but I am 100% God from the Son of Man's perspective. Here, at the end of the book of John, we're going to see that he says that Pilate says, are you a king? And he says, yes, I'm a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. And I love how just those little things right there all fit into the big picture of what's trying to be proved as you go through the book. You also see it in the way that the book starts. I won't take time to go through all of that, but there's a point that's trying to be proved from start to finish all the way through these books. So yes, he's the Son of God in the book of John. All right, anybody else? Is John ever mentioned as the author? I just thought this is a fun fact. Okay, this is for free. A fun fact. Who used to say that? It was I think one of the students. He's like, "You want to hear a fun fact, Mr. Brown?" It's stuck in my head. So whenever I come across things like that, I always think that. You want to hear a fun fact, everybody? So here's one for you on Wednesday night. All right. John never mentions his name in the book of John. He never mentions himself as the author. And if he ever refers to himself, he refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved, all right? Now, it's very interesting because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all refer to John heavily. He's mentioned by name multiple times, at least 20 times in the other Gospels. But in the book of John, all of a sudden, he's silent and he's not there. And what's interesting is the fact that his name is never mentioned actually speaks loudly of the fact that he is the author of the book of John. And the way that I saw this illustration today, and I thought it was great, it jumped out at me, so I want to share it with you. It's like this. Just imagine that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're all on a trip, okay? And they take pictures like everybody wants to do on a trip. They're taking pictures, and in the picture is only Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Who's taking the picture? John, okay? That's kind of the analogy that they're using there. The fact that he's silent, John's the one writing. John's the one that's taking the picture, and he's talking about it from his perspective. So it makes sense that everybody else is there and not John. And so it actually speaks loudly to the fact that they didn't have selfies back then, okay? I get that. I know that, all right? But everybody understands kind of the story behind that and how we know that he's the author. So I thought that was interesting. All right, now, here's another. No one said this. John is different from the other three Gospels, okay? Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the synoptic Gospels. I mentioned a couple weeks ago, like the book of Mark had 97% of the same content that Matthew and Luke had. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, you're going to get almost identical content, identical stories. They're the synoptic Gospels. John comes in, and he's one of the Gospels, but he is totally different, okay? He is set apart. And here's some things that are different about that. And I would just want to mention these real quick because I thought this was interesting as well. John is the most theological of the Gospels. It's a spiritual gospel. That's really the name that Clement of Alexandria, he was an early church father. He gave that name to the book of John. And basically the idea is John is the last gospel that was written. It was actually written multiple years after Matthew, Mark, and Luke were finished. And so here John is getting towards the end of his life. He's probably writing it from Ephesus where he was the pastor before he writes the book of Revelation at the end of his life. So he has access to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so he takes them, and what he does is he fills in some of the things that maybe some of the other books leave missing. He kind of fills in some of that missing information, and he explains things more in depth. So there's less narrative in the book of John. A lot of Matthew, Mark, and Luke is telling a story, but John will explain behind it. So for instance, you have the story of Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Okay, and that story is Nicodemus comes out to him at night because he's a religious leader. He doesn't want to be seen. The story ends, and then the rest of John chapter 3 starts explaining what salvation is. You must be born again. And then he goes into explaining what it means to be born again. And then for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So he really takes time to fully explain the meaning behind it. And so that's some of the things that are different. Another thing that's different about the book of John is he uses the phrase I am. Which, does anybody know what is significant about that phrase, I am? Abraham. Okay? Was it Abraham or was it Moses? It was the burning bush. Remember he said, how am I going to know that you, and he said, I am that I am? There may be, but the significance of the phrase I am is the fact that he's declaring to be God. Okay, so when God was speaking to Moses out of the burning bush, he said, who am I going to tell the people that sent me? And he said, tell them I am that I am sent you. I'm the self-sufficient one. I'm God. I am who I. And so Jesus, the Son of God, is the story that's trying to be told here through the book of John. He uses that phrase in some shape, size, or form 23 different times. That's something that's different from what the other Gospels have. So there's things like that just make the book of John different and unique and set apart from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, okay? So that's just some of the introductory type things that we have there. So you guys should be open to John chapter 20. Look at the key verse, and we're going to see how this is carried through all the way. I'm going to read verse 30, but that's not really the key verse. But it says, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. Sign shows up often throughout the book of John. And then he says in verse 31, but these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. It's the theme verse. That's what he set out to prove from the start of the book all the way through. And that's what we're going to do tonight in the next 19 minutes that we have, is we're just going to kind of walk through as much as we can, and we're going to see how he backs that statement up and how he proves that Jesus is the Son of God and that believing you might have life through his name. All right, so go all the way back to John chapter 1. We're going to start there. We'll give you some questions. Remember, I told you this is the most theological book out of all of the Gospels. Well, you're not going to get much more theological than John 1 through 18, the introduction. Remember how I mentioned earlier how each one of these books, when they begin the introduction, how each one of them is written to the particular theme that's trying to be portrayed. So Matthew talks about the wise men coming to visit Jesus at his birth. Mark just has him starting serving, doesn't even talk about his birth. Luke has him being born in Bethlehem as a man, Well, John just has him being introduced as the Son of God. So here's question number 1. You guys tell me the answer. What do John 1:1 and 1:14 say when you put them together? Okay? And who is the Word? Jesus is God. That's what it's saying. Yeah, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then you go to verse 14, and he says, and the Word was made flesh and dwelled among us. So right off the bat, you have him declaring that Jesus is God. That's exactly who he is. The Word was made flesh and dwelled among us. So Jesus is God in the flesh. He's 100% God. He's 100% man. Theological right there. Now, I like how this just follows. What does 1:4 say the Son of God contains? In him was life, and the life was the light of men. So Jesus came to offer life. Already, you remember what the theme verse was, John 20:31, that Jesus is the Christ, that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. In him was life, okay? In Jesus was life. All right, now look at what it says in 1:13. What can we become? What can we become? We can become the sons of God. All right, so Jesus, in him is life. And then he invites us. He talks about John the Baptist a little bit there, but then he says right off the bat that we can become the sons of God if we do what? It's right there in that verse. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. So right there, he's already setting up. At the end, he sums it all up in that one phrase, but here in the beginning, Jesus is God. In him is life. You can become the sons of God, and you do that by believing in his name. That word believe, I already mentioned, shows up over 100 times in the book of John. As you go throughout it, he's doing signs, and just that word believe, 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 all over the place, keeps showing up. The word believe has significant meaning to it. It means to place one's trust in another. That's extremely important because when you think about it, Jesus had multitudes of people that followed him. I mean, we're going to see that here in just a little bit in John chapter 6, a real interesting story that we're going to look closely at. He had multitudes of people that followed him. I guarantee you they believed in his power. They saw it demonstrated right in front of him. They believed that there was something different and something special about him, but they did not place their trust in him as their Savior, and that's what has to happen. It can't just be a head knowledge. There's a lot of people out there that will tell you, yeah, I believe in God. Yeah, I believe in Jesus. Yeah, I believe that he died on the cross. They'll say that they believe that, but are you placing your trust in that? There has to be a step that's taken where you place your full trust actually in him as your only way of salvation. It cannot just be a head knowledge. That's what the word believe means. And so it's placing your trust in another. And you have to do that in Jesus. And to believe means that you place your trust for salvation. You place your trust in him for life, And he'll tell us in the book of John that you cannot just have life, but abundant life. He talks about you place your trust in Jesus to really give us the abundant life that we're looking for. You place your trust in Jesus that we can actually be the sons of God. I don't think there's a better introduction. I mean, I get fired up just thinking about that. We are the sons of God by simply believing, by placing our trust in him and what he did for us on the cross. That's what we have. We have life. We're the sons of God. Everything is changed and different because the Word became flesh and dwelt among us and went to a cross and died. And so I get excited about the doctrine that's in there. One other quick question and then we'll move on. But look at what 118, what does 118 say about the Son of God? Okay, no one has seen him, but go on. Okay? No man has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father. He who hath declared, that last phrase, who hath declared him, what's that talking about? No man has seen God, but what is Jesus doing about God? Yes. No man has seen God at any time. This is a big theological point, but what's happening in Jesus Christ is he is the express image of God's Son. If you have seen Jesus, you have seen God. And that's what he's trying to say. You want to know who God is? You want to know what his attributes are like? You want to know what his character is like? Look at the life of Jesus. Spend some time in the Gospels and see what Jesus does. See how he heals. See how he loves. See how he forgives. See all of that played out, and you see the Father. That's another really key theological point. In Jesus, you see God. No man's seen God, but now we get a glimpse of what he looks like through his Son, Jesus Christ, who became flesh and dwelt among us. There's a whole lot of other stuff. We could probably take months preaching on just those 18 verses, but that's his introduction right there. All right, now, the next part of the book goes on from chapter 2 all the way down through chapter 11. Jesus demonstrates that he's the Son of God. A lot of this is going to be homework for you. For instance, like he turns the water into wine, proving that he is the source of life and breath and all things. Okay, there's different things like that you can find and discover. But what I want you to do is go to chapter 6. Everybody take a minute and go over to chapter 6. I want to show you how this story plays out. All right, so in John chapter 6, you have the feeding of the 5,000, and what he proves by feeding the 5,000 is that he is the bread of life. You're going to see that show up often here in chapter 6, actually. You're going to see that show up time and time again, that he's the bread of life. So he feeds the 5,000. He proves that he's the bread of life. This is one of the stories where he fills in some missing information in some of the other Gospels. So, for instance, after he gets done feeding the 5,000, the book of Mark says that he left and he went up into a mountain and he sent his disciples in a ship to go across the Sea of Galilee in the middle of the night. A storm came up. He calms the storm. All of that's happening there. But what the book of Mark never said is why Jesus left. Why did he feed 5,000 and then get out of there in a hurry? Anybody want to take a guess? That's exactly right. That's what it says there in chapter 6. He didn't want them to make him king. That's in verse 15. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. So he fills in some extra information there. Why are they leaving? Why are they getting out? Because these people were ready to make him king. Now, this is where he really starts teaching us some really valuable information that goes along with these signs and some lessons that we can learn. Look what it says in verse 25. These people would not leave him alone. So it says, and when they had found him on the other side of the sea, there was some ships and boats, and these people started getting on him, and slowly but surely they all crossed the sea, and they ended up finding Jesus on the other side. It says, they said unto him, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. So you know what he's confronting them? They're coming looking for him. Why did you leave? And he's saying, because you're seeking me for the wrong reasons. It's basically what he's saying. You really aren't willing to accept who I truly am. At this point in Jesus' earthly ministry, he has amassed a great following. And by the way, where Jesus' name is lifted on high, Jesus does attract people. I believe that with all my heart. When his name is lifted on high, he will attract people. But what he often does is when people show up and he starts really preaching the truth, that's when people are confronted and they have a decision to make. Am I going to follow him or am I going to turn away sorrowful? So watch how this plays out. So they're seeking him for the wrong reasons. And then he says in verses 30 and 31, he says, they said therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. What sign? You just ate food from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I just fed 5,000 people. And they're still asking, what sign are you going to give us? What are you going to show us here, Jesus? Come on, do something. Our fathers, they ate manna in the wilderness. What can you do? And Jesus answers and says, then Jesus saith unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you that ye also have seen me, and believe not. So here he is. Give me a sign. Our fathers were fed with bread, with manna in the wilderness. And he says, I am the true bread, and I can give life, and life forevermore. And he goes on in this book to say, and by the way, your fathers ate that manna, and guess what they are? Dead. I just love how he calls it out. They're dead. But the bread that I'm offering you, the bread that my Father has sent to you, I'm standing in front of you. I just fed 5,000 people, and you still want a sign. I got to stop here for just a second, because it blows my mind. I get so critical real fast of other people. I'm like, how can you be so hard-headed, ignorant, and dumb? I mean, how many more miracles do you need to see? And you're going to see this played out through John, because he's the Son of God, and he proves over and over again that he's the Son of God. He demonstrates it. How much more do we need to see? And I get frustrated just thinking, I mean, if Jesus was right in front of us doing miracles, but how many times does Jesus answer our prayers? And how many times does Jesus prove that he's real? And then how many days do we get up and we still doubt? And we still get frustrated? You know, we just have to be really careful not to become judgmental of other people, because more often than not, we find ourselves in those same positions. So he says he's the bread of life. And then look how this passage ends, because this is really interesting. He really, you know how like Matthew's written to the Jews, Mark and Luke are written more to the Gentiles, the Romans, and from that type of perspective. John here is actually he's bashes on the Jews constantly, and he's being antagonistic toward their traditions and their different things. When he said, remember how I told you 23 times he mentions I am? Every single one of them, that was a shot to everything that they believed, because he just kept declaring that he was God. And he just deliberately attacks them over and over again, proving that what you say, you don't even know what you say that you believe. If you really believed Moses, you would believe that I'm God because Moses told you that I was God, you know? And he just comes right at them with things that get under their skin and things that they don't understand. And look how he ends this passage, because this is kind of a hard one to understand. So he says in verse 47, he says, Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. I am that bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, and I will give for the life of the world. The Jews therefore strove among themselves, saying, How can this man give us his flesh to eat? Then Jesus saith unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except ye eat this flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, ye have no life in you. Then he says, Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath life. What is he saying? It sounds bizarre and it sounds crazy, but what he's really saying is you have to fully believe in me. You have to believe that my body was broken for you, that my blood was shed for you, and in essence, you're not literally drinking it, but in essence, you are drinking. Like, you fully believe that that is where your life is at, and that's the only way that you're going to have eternal life. That's the only way that you're going to be saved. And you know what happens at the end of chapter 6? A great group of people left him because the saying was too hard for them, and they abandoned him. So he built up this great following, and then he hits them with the truth. Unless you eat my flesh, and unless you drink my blood, you cannot be saved, you cannot be my disciples. It's a fully committed following of God that he's looking for. And many people turned away at that point because he was not what they wanted him to be. They wanted him to be the king. They wanted him to overthrow the Romans. They didn't want to suffer like he was going to suffer, and they didn't want to follow him in that type of a way. And so he just demonstrates over and over again. There's 7 different miracles that he does in this section, but there's 7 different explanations of why he's doing these miracles and what the point is that he's trying to teach and prove that he is the Son of God. So I just thought that was a really interesting story. Now I got to decide how I want to wrap up my time, okay? Let's just go to the second to last point. Jesus teaches us we can be confident in the Son of God. So chapters 13 through 17. This is all, the first 12 chapters happen over the course of a couple of years. The last, from chapter 13 all the way through chapter 22, happens in 6 days. All right, and then a good chunk of it happens the night before that he's betrayed at the Last Supper. So this is all really good stuff. You go to chapter 13. Let's start there. Well, I won't read a lot of verses. I'll just tell you what's happening. So his very nature is self-giving love. And what did he do to prove his love and to teach how we are to love? You know what he did in the beginning of this? After he comes into Jerusalem, he comes in on Palm Sunday, and he comes in and he's declared as king, and then Mary comes and she anoints him and worships him. This is Mary, Martha's sister, who actually sat at Jesus' feet, and she understood exactly what Jesus was saying. And when Lazarus was raised from the dead, it was a declaration to the world that Jesus was going to die. And after he rides into Jerusalem, Mary shows up, and that's that scene where she anoints his feet. And what she's doing is she fully understands that he's going to die. She's preparing him for his death. Mary never goes to the grave, the tomb, after he dies, because she actually sat at his feet and listened to what he said all along and understood what was happening and what was taking place. So then you go into this supper at the end of the week. And in the supper, before he dies, his disciples are fighting. Mark tells us that. They're arguing, who's the greatest among us? Who's our leader? Who's our chief? You know? And Jesus gets up in the middle of that supper, and he gets down on his hands and his knees, the Son of God, and he washes his disciples' feet. That's the context of what's happening there. Sometimes, Peter says, I'll never let you wash my feet. And he says, you can't be saved. And Peter's like, wash my head, my toes, everything. Wash every part of my body. I love Peter's emotions there. But the story behind that is his disciples are such carnal Christians at this point, and they're so consumed with this world and who's going to be the greatest and who's going to be the leader. And Jesus, the Son of God, gets up and he washes their feet, proving his love. And then he goes on and says in that chapter, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. By this, you've heard this a few times from me, one of my favorite verses I like to remind us of all the time. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if ye have love one for another. That's the context of that. His stinking carnal disciples fighting and arguing over who's greatest, and he gets down and washes their feet and says, you know what? There's a new commandment, and you love each other, and all the world will know that you are my disciples if you have love one for another. Then he goes into this great discourse in John chapter 14 where he's giving his followers confidence. John 14 says, in my Father's house are many mansions, and if it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And Thomas saith unto him, we know not the way. And Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Now he's getting ready to go. And you know what he says right after that? Don't be afraid. I'm going to send a comforter who's going to come and teach you all things. I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit. I'm not leaving you alone in this world. So what's our confidence in the Son of God? He's sent the Comforter. We have the Holy Spirit of God living inside of us that will teach us all things, that will empower us. And he promises in that same passage that whatsoever we ask according to his will, he's going to answer it. And what's the confidence that we've had? We've already seen him turn water into wine. We've already seen him calm the storm. We've seen him raise a dead person back from the grave. He is the Son of God, and he's left us in this world to make a difference for him. He's not going to leave us comfortless. He sends the Comforter. He promises to answer our prayers, and he goes through all of these incredible things in those chapters. He says in chapter 15, you can abide in the vine. We can abide in the vine. We can abide in God. We can have a real relationship with him. And if we abide in the vine, we can bring forth much fruit. And if we bring forth much fruit and we're abiding in the vine and his love, his joy remains in us and our joy may be full. Look at John 15. I got to show you this verse real quick. You got to see this. This is huge. He says, follow my commandments and carry on my mission and I will empower you. Look at how this is played out. He says in verse 12, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. This is shown up a lot. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Then he says, ye are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Look at this next phrase in verse 15. This is just absolutely incredible. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you. God doesn't call us his servants. He calls us his friends. And then he says in the next verse that ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you and ordained you. He's given us a commandment to go love one another. And when we follow his commandments and when we obey him, we're his friends. We're not his servants. We're his friends. We have that type of intimate, close relationship with God. That's why we carry on his mission. That's why we stay in this world. And that's why we go out and proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ to everybody that we come in contact with. That's why we bear reproach for his name. That's why we die to ourselves and forgive and love one another even when we've been wronged, because we carry on his mission that he left us in this world to do. And we do it because we don't have to, but because we're his friends. And we get to. And if that's the perspective that we leave with the gospel and what Jesus Christ, the Son of God's done for us, think about how that changes everything that we do and the motive behind why we do it. But so often we approach the Christian life like we're just the things that we have to do in life. No. We should carry on that mission because he calls us his friends, not his servants. And he has every right to demand that we serve him and every right to demand that we bow down. But no, he gave his life so that we could be the sons of God and so that we could have an abundant life. And you do it by abiding in the vine and loving one another and obeying his commandments. It's good stuff. Last point, I'll just mention a couple of these things because I just think they're awesome. Jesus proves he is the Son of God. At the last, of course, he dies on the cross and he raises again, and that's ultimately the greatest proof that he is the Son of God. He has power over death, hell, and the grave. When the soldiers came to arrest him in the garden, and they said, who do you search for? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. What happens? In the book of John, they all fall down. I came across that a couple years ago in my devotions, and I just remember just like underlining that, stopping at that point, and just being like, what? I mean, like, I know they came to arrest him in the garden, and it's like they just grab him and they take him. They said, who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. And everyone, when he spoke that word, falls down on the ground because he is the Son of God, and he is declaring, I am he. And they fall down. And you know what those people do? They get back up and they arrest him. It just blows my mind. Again, I probably would have done the same thing, though. I mean, just the power of his spoken word right there, I am he. And they get up and they raise him again. And they arrest him and they take him and he ends up dying. But he rises again and he proves that he is the Son of God. So you find that played out. And then it ends with this. It ends very interesting. The very last chapter is where Peter gets his forgiveness. Okay, and it starts off with one more sign. They're out fishing. He says, cast your net on the other side. They cast their net on the other side, and guess what they catch? A whole bunch of fish. And Peter, being the impulsive man that he is, gets out of the boat and leaves John and the other disciples hanging to bring in all the fish, and he just runs straight to Jesus. And that's what's happening. And then he sits with Jesus, and Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord. And he says, feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, feed my sheep. Peter, 3 times. How many times did Peter deny him? 3. How many times did he forgive him? 3. Feed my lambs. Then it ends really interesting, and he looks over at the disciple whom thou lovest, John. And because he told Peter that he's going to die. He basically said, Peter, you're going to die. I'm going to carry you. You're going to be used, but you're going to die. And he looks over at John, and he says, what's going to happen to the disciple whom thou lovest? What's going to happen to him? And Jesus says, who cares? Doesn't matter what happens to him. Follow thou me. And that's really a powerful question that he ends the book with. He's the Son of God. who gives life. And we have it by believing and putting all of our trust in him. And we get to be his friends and the sons of God, and we get to carry out his mission. What are you going to do? Who cares what happens to anybody else? Who cares what their lot is in life? Who cares if you struggle and suffer more than them, if you've been wrong more than them? It does not matter. God has you in this world, and he has a plan and a purpose for you. Are you going to follow him? That's how it is.